Hello everyone, my name is Pearlescent Moon and welcome back to week 7 of my Minecraft ABuildADay challenge. For anyone new to this challenge, the basic idea is that I create at least one build per day for a full 365 or 366 day duration. During week 7, I felt inspired to try and create a structure for 7 different biomes that used only the blocks available in each biome. This particular challenge aimed to tap into survival capabilities. However, I did go astray on a couple because I had an idea that I just wanted to build. With all that said and done, let's start building our Savanna home. With day 43 underway, I decided the best way to approach the general theme is to start off with building our terrain for the structural context. It just had to be enough to give the sense of a savanna, so it's nothing super fancy. With my base in, I was influenced by traditional homes in Africa and went for an oval form for the structure. The essential guideline I went with was an ovular house slightly embedded into the ground, that had a shape starting smaller at the bottom and getting bigger the higher it went up before slightly decreasing in size again just below the roof. With this shape, we get more of an onion or squashed bubble look, creating a unique structure in the zone. For anyone new to the channel that might not know my building method, I also start off in placeholder blocks, so I'm able to focus on the shape of the structure first without getting too carried away in the detail and palette. With this, you can also do a bulk replace command on blocks with world edit without affecting blocks that you didn't initially wish to change by accident. The shape of your structure is what's going to define the overall style and direction you take with the detail and surroundings. For example, if you create a structure with a slightly flattened look, design infers that everything around it would also carry this aesthetic. In such a case, the acacia trees are not pointy, nor is anything in the biome itself. You want to match shapes with similar shapes in its environment. It's all of course in a case-by-case scenario, but I think this house with a flattened roof and form matches the acacia trees quite nicely. Palette-wise, I stayed within the blocks that were available within the savanna itself. If you are in survival and wish to build this home while being spawned in the biome, then you could safely collect all the resources you would need to create it without having to delve into other areas. Henceforth, this uses stripped acacia and planks in the walls itself, contrasted with some oak wood on the roof so it doesn't blend, and granite on the base of the structure to give it a sense of stability. Looking around in the vanilla biome itself, there were oak trees spawned within it, so it's very much possible to create. The variation of stripped oak and planks gives a nice texture to the roof itself. To top it off in detail, I used acacia trapdoors for the window segments to bring back a bit of that natural feel instead of glass, and surrounded it with bushy oak leaves, complete with a nice seating area to view the surroundings. Day 44 was a bit of a special one. The snapshots for the 1.16 update had come out with some fancy new blocks, and I was fairly excited to build with them. Because of this, I also wasn't able to attain the time-lapse footage of the process from lack of replay mod and ability for another player or alt account to join. However, I did livestream it, so here's some footage snippets of the process. If you guys would like to see the whole livestream recording, it is up on the channel for everyone to see. I'll leave a link below in the description if you're interested. Because I was new to the blocks, I laid out everything first to see what I had available to me and went from there. I think it was a nice challenge to try and build using all of the new blocks, instead of one or the other, so I used the new warped and crimson wood to contrast each other and meld within the environment around it. The blocks by themselves did need a bit of supporting blocks to bring it all together however, so you might see a few existing blocks placed in the build. Sea lanterns worked really nice for some lighting that still matched the blue accent in the build. To be honest, I wasn't really sure what I was doing with this build and just randomly placed shapes together to form some sort of home. I was just having fun with the new blocks. So when the desert came around, it just screamed Sandcastle to me. A build using only materials made by sand just inspired me to make a build that felt like it was carved from the desert itself. From here, I based my inspiration partly off a real castle and a typical upside down bucket sandcastle you'd find on the beach. I don't know if any of you guys grew up with those buckets, but I certainly did. The cylindrical towers were inspired by beach castles, and to mix up the shape a bit, I added rectangular shaped pieces in contrast. At the very least, this build overall was only successful if the shaping was correct, as there were no palette choices that had to be made. It was all made out of one block. In a sense, this build is a good example of why shape and composition is so important to making a build aesthetically pleasing. It's not relying on a palette to create an interesting design, and even the detail is fairly minimal, yet still works because of the form. I did stretch the definition of Sandcastle a little bit by adding glass in a couple of the window holes, but still figured it would pass from the sheer fact that sand can be smelted into the material and built with. Maybe a sandcastle competition with the community could be a bit of fun someday. Could be cool, maybe. On day 46, I felt inspired by the mesa. However, in my attempts to create something I was happy with in my mind, I decided to go a little awry from the challenge a bit and make some old western cowboy buildings using any wood I desired. That architecture type just fit the environment so well, so I had to give it a go. Instead of building the environment entirely from scratch, I just grabbed a bit of terrain from a vanilla generated map to use as a backdrop, and then built the platform's terrain myself. Western buildings are usually very square or rectangular in nature, with flat roofs and a slight decorative lip on the front, hosting either a shop sign or just intricate structural detail. This is where I blocked 3 buildings out sitting side by side, with a small wooden bridge to the back of the environment to emulate a train track bridge, one you would normally see a steam train travel across a ravine on. Although those 3 buildings followed the same general shape, I varied it up a little bit by making some higher and some shorter. This gives a bit of that dynamic viewpoint that would otherwise be missing from buildings that all look the same. Instead of seeing all the same buildings and expecting the same detail on all of them, we give the viewer a reason to keep looking for new details in each one and make it look interesting. Most references for this particular style also kept to a mostly wooden structure, so I contrasted using the different tones of brown wood. I think it worked fairly nice and also fits in with the warm tones of the environment around it. Stairs worked nicely to lip around the rooftops of each building, coupled with some slight angled roofs onto the front and fencing to add small details underneath. Due to there being no glass used in this style, fence gates worked as a simulated window barrier as well. In the end, I tied up the scene with some tamed horses, smoke from chimneys, and cacti placed all around. Now, what else will go in the mushroom biome than a mushroom itself? As much as this particular build was more organic than structural, I think it worked out well to simulate a mushroom home in this otherworldly and fantasy type of biome. In general, you also won't find much in the way of wood except for the odd oak tree that may have spawned on the edges of the island. So the build uses mostly mushroom blocks to create it, mixing in a few bone blocks and stone types that you can find underground. To create the general shape, I started off with a fairly cylindrical shape that I gradually built up and decreased in size as I got higher, but chopped it back a bit later on after feeling like it was a bit big. I also felt that the mushroom in general would look a bit strange just by itself, so I built up a couple more smaller stalked mushrooms off the side. The mushroom cap itself was probably the more challenging part, where I just aimed for a general curved shape on the top, slightly tilted to go with the angle of the mushroom itself. A lot of it was just going by eye and removing blocks or adding blocks if I thought it was off. In a way, organics are like drawing. You look at it and gauge what might seem wrong if you compare it to a real-life reference and adjust it from there. However, don't be afraid to add volume to an organic. The stalks of the smaller mushrooms are basically vines without the mushroom cap, so I curved them around and over the larger cap itself. Colouring wise, I utilised the stone variants to help add a simulated shadow to the build itself, from andesite to diorite and then mushroom stem block. Using the bone block in the smaller mushroom stems also very lightly sets them apart from the main segment. For the mushroom caps themselves, I mixed in some granite with brown mushroom blocks to give it a nice texture, alongside some cute diorite spots. Other than that, to finish it all up, I opened up some holes for windows in the stalk with some glass and kelp blocks for shading, and we melded the terrain with the mushroom with a few small, simple rocks. Now, unfortunately, day 48 got hit hard with the lost video footage blues. I started building, paused the recording to go do something, came back and, well, forgot to continue the recording again. So this one has 2 clips. Me starting the build and me finishing it. Yeah, sorry about that one. Regardless, this day was a jungle-themed build, in which I just had to go with the treehouse. I started the build off with our basic buddy, the jungle tree, and started sketching out the shape of my structure in our typical lapis block. For this one, I went with a rounded shape to match the trees that bulged out like the Savanna build to give a bit more room for any possible interior design. Of course, the vanilla trees looked a bit funky, following the shape of the structure, so this is where I bulked out the foliage by marking out new tufts with emerald blocks, all the while blocking out shape ideas for the build as I went. Iron blocks marked out the roof idea, and diamond blocks marked out balcony segments. In order to add more to the shape, I added a little tower popping out the top with a cute chimney. And voila! Magic! Build done! Alright, let's go home. Well, even though my footage skipped, let's explain a bit of the detail, shall we? The palette once again used blocks obtainable in the jungle biome, so it stayed along the lines of stone with jungle and oak wood variants for accents in the roof and structure lines. The vanilla jungle tree shape was also rather boring, so I added my own curvy and intertwining branches surrounding the structure with small tufts of leaves on top. It's rather fun to integrate nature into builds. To tie up the build, I made my own shallow sloping terrain at the base, accompanied by some placed rocks, bushes, and jungle trees to set the scene context on the structure. The last day of this biome experiment week ended with the most challenging one of them all, the birch biome. Now, my love for your vanilla, untouched birch wood is pretty much non-existent, and the use for the block itself is also almost non-existent. I also like to reiterate that I don't mind the planks or the strip version, it's just the raw wood itself. Incorporating the raw block into the build was probably one of the more challenging moments. But that's the point, to challenge myself. So hey, here's the best build I have done, I'm incredibly proud of it, it's a cow. Moo. Alright, it's not April Fool's and I can't leave it there, so let's get into the actual build. I personally had no real vision for how I was going to make the house, so the cow was my little procrastination as I built up my thoughts a little bit. I started out with a general, slightly inclined terrain to match with the typical, mostly flat vanilla terrain and went from there. I felt like I could make some sort of suburban-like house with the palette provided in the biome, and blocked it out in rectangular prisms and cubes with your general A-frame roof. The only spot I felt like I could somewhat successfully incorporate birch into the build is adding a small trim around the bottom. Does it work? Yes and no. Not really, but at the same time, yes. It's a very birchy build, let's just say that. To balance out the birch block, I added a trim of diorite along the bottom to give it a bit of structural integrity and add another white block that isn't riddled with those terrible birch spots. I decided to contrast the light birch colours with some dark oak wood that ended up giving slight forest cabin vibes and allowed the stripped birch and birch planks to overtake the roof line. In order to not drown out the build entirely with wood, I also added some stone segments on the house. This in a way allows the wood to be the feature of the build, instead of dominating it entirely. Luckily, my favourite block, the lectern, is also made out of oak wood as its initial texture, so I could pair it up with the oak planks I used as accents for our usual balcony railings, alongside some fence and trapdoor detailing as well. After detailing the structure itself, I could put together the surrounding gardens and farms, make myself a couple of custom birch trees to resemble real ones, place some coarse dirt down for some nice natural paths, and then we could call it done. And that concludes all the builds for my week 7 of my ABuildADay challenge. I know a lot of people have been asking down in the comments for a download of these builds, and each video I do, I seem to forget to mention it. Regardless, all the builds for this challenge are available to YouTube members and Twitch subscribers through the community Discord linked below in the description. Tier 1 subs and members get access to 1 week of builds at a time, whereas Tier 2 and above get access to all of the builds at once. Unfortunately, I've had to do it this way, as every time I have uploaded my builds to the general public, they are stolen and claimed as someone else's work. Adding monetary support to my work tends to deter most of the thieves. Regardless, I am also transitioning to full-time YouTube and attempting to give it a proper try instead of this massively inconsistent schedule we've had for all these years. Providing access to my work this way also supports this journey and allows me to create content for you all. With that said, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. And as always, if you have any feedback, please feel free to let me know in the comments below, as I read everything you guys have to say. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!